self. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So today I'm going to talk about training with our emotions, our feelings, and the lens of the pandemic, to kind of look at the pandemic through our practice of training with our feelings and emotions. And actually, this is a very difficult subject. There are so many feelings and reactions one has concerning the pandemic. The feeling of grief, of fear, of helplessness, anger, despair, confusion, terror, worry, isolation. These are just a partial list. So there's a lot that's come with this pandemic. Feelings for me are a very difficult subject. All of my life, certainly from early childhood, I have watched and experienced feelings, and they seem to be the keys that caused all sorts of upheaval, chaos, uncertainty, disharmony, separation, disputatiousness, and they were the disturber of any hope of peace and well-being. So feelings for me were very scary, especially for myself and others, and the others in my family. I was scared of people's feelings. Now, feelings can also be joy, happiness, well-being, peace. Those are also feelings, but they seemed in my life to be rarer and very fleeting. Some of us define our world by our feelings. My mom was so fearful of so much of life, and she worried too. And there was this constant flow in my life, which was steeped in fear and insecurity and worry. Not dissimilar from what's going on for a lot of people right now. So I can really relate to this. Life is not secure, and the uncertainty is very difficult to train with. The way my family sought to deal with the pressures and the fears was to primarily drink alcohol and provide a temporary relief, which of course then was like putting alcohol on fire. It tended to blow up into situations. So when I found the Dharma, and I began practicing, there was this huge relief in my life. There was something that was stable in a very chaotic world. So that was very helpful. So here we are in the midst of this pandemic. And because I have been trying for years to practice with my emotion, the situation's not dissimilar from my upbringing. It's very familiar. And I really feel for people. I mean, some people are struggling. They've lost their jobs, they're losing their homes, they're losing their apartments, they're debating whether to feed their children or to turn on the light. I mean, life can get very desperate at times. And I am in deep sympathy with what is going on for a lot of people. And so I raised the question, well, how do we spiritually train in difficult situations like this? And also for us as meditators, we tend to feel what's going on in the world and what's going on with others. And how do we train with that? How do we not get overwhelmed by the grief and horror of this world? And because, as I said, I've been working on feelings, I'm aware of the tension in my body. I've become very aware of the tension in my body. And during the training with aging retreat that we had, during one of the discussions of which I was a participant, someone said, how do you practice? How do you train when you're in constant pain? And one of our long-term practitioners, who herself has quite a bit of pain, she responded and she said how important it was to let go of our clenching and to relax with the pain. And that was helpful to the woman who was in pain, and I think it was extremely helpful for all of us, because there is a certain clenching we do in response to our pain. And the importance of taking a breath and letting go, stopping that clenching, but letting it go, is enormously helpful. The truth of all suffering, it seems to me, is the release that begins within us. And for me, and maybe for everyone else, I don't know this, but it's almost always a physical response. The response of letting go, of releasing the clenching and the being still. They kind of all move together in the opening to the suffering. And this is also how we train with emotions or feelings, because we have to shift our outward looking and shift the outward seeking of solutions to the inward looking, to the breathtaking, to the moments within, the still place within. I didn't have a lot of still places. I don't have a lot of still places in my life, but I'm finding them, and they are there, and that's really important. And when we get still, we start to shift our perspective just by turning in. When we're angry and we're feeling that heat from the anger, if we turn within and we don't direct it out, we can just be with ourselves, and there can be a stilling, not a repression. It's not about repressing our feelings. It's really about turning towards them and letting them open us and teach us. Now, sometimes we can look out and see what other people are doing and learn from it, and that it's helpful to observe what's going on. We have to observe ourselves and observe others. But then we have to take that observation and distill it within our body and find our truth, find the distillation of the truth for us. You know, sometimes relative to the pandemic, I hear people say, oh, I can't wait till it's over and we can get back to normal. And, you know, there's this desire to be able to do what you want to do and visit who you want to visit and forget about illness and death and economic upheaval and just go shopping. Okay? I understand this. This is a very human quality. It's so human, it's probably part of our DNA. You know, I mean, really, this is how we are. We don't want to learn deeply from the present. We just want it to be over. So we can do what we want. That's actually a recipe for suffering right there. Reverend Master Khoten once said that we are all trying to build a house in the middle of a raging river, and we wonder why it's not working. And I found that completely applicable to the pandemic, because clearly we are ignoring the perilous nature of what we're doing. People are choosing not to wear masks and going out. They don't believe that it's going to happen, that it's a hoax. There's all kinds of ranges of us of all of us denying what's going on. So it's really helpful to just think, oh, well, you know, let's not build this house in the middle of the raging river. Let's try and do something different. Now, I read something in the New York Times by Pope Francis, and I found it just spot on for what we're feeling. And he's talking about the pandemic. And he says, if we are to come out of this crisis less selfish than when we went in, we have to let ourselves be touched by others' pain. That, I think, is a very important line right there. He says, there is a line in Frederick Holderlin's Hyperion that speaks to me about how the danger that threatens in a crisis is never total. There's always a way out. Where the danger is also grows the saving power. That's the genius in the human story. There's always a way to escape destruction. Where humankind has to act is precisely there, in the threat itself. That's where the door opens. This is a moment to dream big, to rethink our priorities, what we value, what we want, what we seek, and to commit to act in our daily life on what we have dreamed of. To come out of this crisis better, he says, we have to recover the knowledge that as a people, we have a shared destination. Not just the rich, not just the people who have power, but all of us. We have a shared destination. The pandemic has reminded us that no one is saved alone. What ties us to one another is what we commonly call solidarity. Solidarity is more than acts of generosity, important as they are. It is the call to embrace the reality that we are bound by bonds of reciprocity. I'm not pronouncing that right. On this solid foundation, we build a better, different human future. I love that in part because really it isn't about getting back to normal. It's about learning from what happened and opening ourselves up to that and coming out stronger and better because of it. The Buddha taught us to see things as they really are, and I think some people take that on its very first thing of, oh yeah, we have to pay attention, we have to be aware, which is true, we do. But part of seeing things as they truly are is to see that we're in the raging river and we're trying to build a house and it's not working. Seeing that things aren't working is part of seeing things the way they are. Oh, this is the way I always react, and has it ever worked? I can say from personal experience, no, it hasn't. And part of it, part of seeing things as they are, comes to the question of how can I help? How can I do things differently? How can I help myself? And how can I help others? Can one be still in the middle of a raging river? Yes, I believe. Can one be still in a pandemic where huge numbers of people are on the move, literally millions, trying to find a safe shelter, trying to find jobs, trying to find food, trying to find safety from illness and death? This is what's going on in our world right now. How do we, as meditators, open our hearts to the cries of the world and not drown in the pandemic and the sorrows of the world? Is this possible? What we do in our own training for ourselves is not separate from what we do with others. Our willingness to unclench our reactions to pain is as applicable on the micro level as it is on the macro level. There's a beautiful example of this from Etty Hillson in a book called An Interrupted Life, who was a Jew in Holland during World War II. She kept a diary of her life, and honestly, it was really hard to read it in the beginning because she was very self-absorbed and selfish. And I could relate to that. And then she had a deep spiritual opening. And her diary became a treasure trove of how someone stays open to the horrors and suffering of what's going on in war and extermination, and never loses the reverence and appreciation for the preciousness of life, the flowers that bloom, the person who reaches out to others, the moments of non-judgment and acceptance. It's just a wonderful diary and many helpful things to read. At one point, she writes about how she and others are saying, "Where's God? Why isn't he helping us? What's going on? What's wrong?" And then she has an epiphany, and she says, oh, it isn't about God helping us. It's about us helping God. And it totally changed the perspective for her. And instead of the gimme or where are you, it becomes, oh, how can I help? And that totally changed her situation. And it applies, no surprise, to what's going on right now. Because it isn't about getting rid of the pandemic or the racial injustice or the climate change. It's not about getting rid of these things. It's about turning towards them and saying, how can I help? How can I open myself to this? How can we unclench our reactions? And actually, I think we each have to find our own answers to that. How do we? Because it varies. But the possibilities are unlimited. Sometimes I have observed when I meditate that in the beginning I scan myself, so to speak, and I see where I'm tense, and I see what I'm holding on, and I try and unclench, relax, let go, and then be still. And I come back to that. And actually that helps me, that scanning and that release. It helps me to be still. It helps me to listen. The pandemic has taught me that we actually can connect with others without being in physical contact. This is possible. If we go back to World War II, there were millions of people who died without being surrounded by their families and loved ones. Other people spent years before they found out whether someone died or not. Sometimes they never found out. They never found out what happened. So this can teach us that the unknowing is a part of the process, and that it doesn't stop us from loving the person we love. It doesn't get in the way, really. We can just love a person, whether we're with them or not. And I think that is a really important thing for us all to learn, because love is really a powerful emotion, and when we hinder it, that's very painful for us. So part of the unclenching is the unclenching of our love, and just saying, well, these are what the conditions are that I'm in, and how do I love people whether I'm with them or not? That also opens us to the reality that whether we are physically present or not, there's so much we can do. We can offer merit. We just had a ceremony this morning, the transfer of merit ceremony, where we offered merit, we read names, we recited scriptures, and we dedicated it in effect to the whole world. This is what we are doing. And that in itself is really helpful. I've had physical illness myself, and there were periods of time when I would wake up in the middle of the night and I could not sleep. And so I would get up and meditate, and then sometimes if I was still wide awake, I would read scriptures for the benefit of people. And I found this, and including not just people I know, but people I don't know. There was just this willingness to offer the scripture to whoever it could help. And actually that helped. I felt the help that created. It wasn't me. It was just that willingness to pour that out to whoever could find it helpful. The Buddha himself spent a lot of his practice at night practicing loving kindness, would recite the Metta Sutra, would radiate loving kindness to the world. Well, how are we any different? Can't we do this? This is something we can all do and help. It's a really important way to help. There's this lovely part in the book, which is called Into the Heart of Life, and it's written by Jetsuma Tenzin Palmo. And she's talking about that in Tibetan meditation, they visualize the bodhisattva of compassion. And then they are, as part of the visualization, they're supposed to imagine that they are the bodhisattva of compassion. And she said what most people do is think, oh yes, I'm Mary Smith, and I'm pretending to be Kanzeon. And what she says is that actually they are Kanzeon pretending to be Mary Smith. And you need to change your perspective, look at reality different. Well, I just love that. I just love that. But she says this basic delusion that we identify with the wrong things is at the root of all our problems. So I took that thought and I applied it to emotions. What if when I'm feeling fearful, and because of what someone's saying or acting, what if I identified with their Buddha nature or their kindness or their compassion rather than the thing I seemingly am afraid of? And I find this a great revelation. It's actually freeing a lot of the clenching that occurs with emotions, because it's just a question of shifting the view of, instead of seeing someone as an enemy or difficult, you see someone as the Buddha who is pointing out something to you that you need to see, even if it's unskillfully being pointed. And I find that enormously helpful. I have also found, to shift my view of the bodhisattvas that Tenzin Palmo was talking about, if we start seeing that we are aspects of the bodhisattva of compassion, or the bodhisattva of wisdom, or the bodhisattva of love, or the bodhisattva of hell, that if we see ourselves in this way, we take on something much bigger than who we appear to be in our own minds. I don't know whether that makes sense, but it's like opening up to the fact that we're all connected, and we all have Buddha nature, and we all wish to do good, and that this is what we have for offering out to the world. And we're part of like an army, a really good army that we want to be a part of, that doesn't go out and make war. It actually is an army of peace. And it's just so helpful to take a more expansive view on the sorrows of the world. Then we don't drown. Then we are actually just swimming in the river with everybody else and saying, oh, how about over there? Can you grab a rock there? In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha says, "My pure land will not be destroyed. Even though sentient beings may see it as utterly consumed by fire, letting themselves be filled with grief and horror, distress and fear." What is that asking of us? This is a really important question. Do we see, and I do, I see the world in grief and horror, distress and fear. But can I see the Pure Land? Because it's there right now. The work of our emotional landscape can be an opening, a new friend to help us shift from the land of grief and horror to the Pure Land. And may we all come out of the pandemic with that distillation, that the pandemic is not this horror, but it's something that we all get to train in, where we learn to be less selfish, as Pope Francis said, where we learn to open our hearts and move together with all beings. And that's not separate, it's not separate from our own internal work that we're doing. It's in and then goes out. So thank you very much.